Thank you very much to Alice at Wonderland Games for the 30-person raid. For those who have just joined us, you are currently watching Corathon, which is a mutual aid fundraiser raising money for Cora, a friend of the community who is looking to move to a place who will accept her for who she is. Due to the anti-trans legislation in the state of Texas, Cora needs help with moving expenses so that she can safely move to a state with LGBTQ plus friendly laws and communities. We are here putting on this marathon to support and provide for a trans friend in need, and we are so grateful for any donations that you can provide to help. If you want to find out how to donate, be sure to go !donate. That will send you a link. And for the runs we have currently lined up for the close off the first night of Corathon, very shortly we will have a run of Hades. Hades, it'll be 2 players, 1 controller, hyper-modded 3 weapons by Trash Lapras and Arcalena. After that, we will be followed by Sly Cooper and the Thieves Raccoons. So, by Alice at Wonderland Games, so be sure to stick around for that. So thank you very much again for joining us. Okay, everyone, are you ready? Because I am very excited and I am very ready for our next run. This is going to be so much fun. Everyone, it is time for Hades. 2 players, 1 controller, hyper-modded 3 weapons by Trash Lapras and Arcalena. Best of luck and take it away.
How's my favorite boy doing, huh?
Hi everyone, this is Trash Lapras.
And I'm Arcalena.
And we're going to be doing 3 weapons, hyper-modded, full hyper-modded with wave control for y'all.
And we have on commentary, Nevik and Sleepsoul.
Good morning.
Hello.
Okay, so shall we just open up by introducing what all of those many words that we just said actually mean?
Yeah, sounds good. So, 2P1C or 2 players, 1 controller, they're basically, 2 people doing the same. They're sharing a controller, pretty straightforward. So, a little bit more specific to Hades, we have 3 weapons, which is essentially they're going to be sitting down and playing 3 back-to-back Hades runs, trying to go as fast as possible in real time. And then hyper-modded, and specifically full hyper-modded, is the specific mod pack that we're running on. So in Hades, we have a bunch of different mod pack options, and they just kind of adjust the RNG to make it a bit better of a speed game.
Yeah, and we'll be explaining the details of what hypermodded entails later on as it comes up in the run. So we've checked the mirror, we've checked the pact, have we?
Yeah, we're all good to go. You want to count us in?
Yep. Okay, so 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and go.
Okay, let's get this done.
All right, so we'll be starting with the Achilles spear here. So there are 6 total weapons in Hades. Each of those weapons then has 4 aspects, they're called, which basically variations upon that weapon, which give us different buffs, different extra powers that add to that weapon. So the Achilles variant of the spear is one of our favorites for speedrunning the game in general. Basically what it does is it changes our special, so instead of just throwing it and being able to call it back, we can throw it and then actually zip back over to it, so basically adding a teleport to the weapon. And every time we do that teleport, which is called Raging Rush, we'll then add a 150% buff to our next 4 attacks or casts. So that's a huge buff for the early game. It does fall off slightly in the late game, but we'll look into other tools that we'll pick up, which will help support us through that. And the first thing we've picked up there was Flurry Jab. Can you explain Flurry Jab for us, Nevik?
Yeah, so Flurry Jab is the preferred hammer for Achilles Spear and also Zag Spear, which is the other aspect you can get it on, because it essentially changes the dash strike animation. It makes you attack really, really quickly, and that means that essentially every dash strike that we do also gets a normal attack buffered right after it. So combine that with the 150% damage buff from the special, and it basically solves the first half of the game for us. There are other hammer options for the spear, but it turns out that Flurry Jab is just far and away the best option, and that's one of the reasons actually that we have the mod pack, because some of these weapons are really dependent on the hammers that we pick up. So the mod pack just removes a lot of the variance and resets, and do we get the hammer, do we not get the hammer?
Yes, exactly. And Achilles is, in particular, a very hammer-dependent weapon. If you're playing unmodded, you pretty much just reset for Flurry Jab because it makes such a huge difference. I mean, you can see we're immediately just shredding everything in front of us. We're almost done with Tartarus already.
Yeah.
Just because...
Also, the other thing that we picked up here that's helping us kill everything is Artemis Attack, which is kind of one of the 2 go-tos for Achilles again. Because it adds a good crit chance, which is obviously one of the better ways to scale, especially when you're attacking so quickly. It just turns into a very consistent damage source, especially in the early game.
Yes, and just in case anyone isn't aware, just to take it back to what a hammer is, basically every aspect in the game, every weapon in the game rather, has as well as the boons that we can pick up, blessings from each individual god, we can also pick up Daedalus hammers. We only get 2 per run generally, and those are just base modifiers that affect the weapon itself rather than its specific moves. So in this case, modifying the dash strike and attack animations, making everything a lot quicker. And as you say, just because of the raw attack speed combined with that Achilles buff, which just gives us a huge extra buff on all of our attacks, we're just dealing a huge amount of damage right now.
Yep. The other thing that we picked up in Tart, we didn't quite have time to touch on it when we picked it up, but we got our first Hermes. So Hermes is another one of the really big change points in normal runs. So Hermes boons can be really swingy for how a build turns out. So for this first Hermes, we got +3 dashes, which is really good, especially when our main damage comes from dash strikes. So we just picked up our second there. That gave us hyper sprint, which basically lets us move faster after a dash. So between these 2 boons, we actually have really, really good mobility just on our own. And combining that again with the Achilles special, which lets us just zip around rooms, and we actually have a really great set of movement for just getting through chambers.
Yes, and another thing we've just picked up there is one of the tools that will let us scale better into the late game. That was Ares' cast, that being Slicing Shot. So since that Achilles buff applies to both attacks and also casts, and moreover it attacks to each instance of a cast, now every time we send out one of those Slicing Shots, every time we proc that buff, the next 4 instances of Slicing Shot, which stays out for a really long time, are going to be hugely buffed there by 150%. So each of those is just going to give us a huge consistent damage source, which is great for bosses, great for the late game, and generally a lot more reliable for the late game rather than our attack.
Yeah. The other thing that we just picked up that buffs our cast is called Mirage Shot. It essentially shoots out, instead of shooting out 1 Slicing Shot, we get 2. It doesn't do quite full damage, at least on Achilles. We'll talk about Mirage Shot more when we get to Beowulf. But it's another good way to scale the cast. And like Sleep said, a lot of, especially once we get into Elysium and later, a lot of our like boss damage is going to be coming from this cast. So what we're really focusing on is trying to scale it. Mirage Shot wasn't actually what we were looking for, though, when we picked up that Artemisin shop. We were probably looking for the boon Duobone Hunting Blades, which is between Artemis and Ares. And what that does is it makes our slicing shot, instead of just going out in a straight line and bouncing off of walls, it makes it just home towards enemies, which, again, is really good for damage and makes it a little bit more usable in normal rooms as well.
And while we've been talking about this, we are almost out of Asphodel already. We didn't even have time to talk about the first boss, and now we're running out of time to talk about the second one as well. But yeah, you can just see us absolutely shredding the second boss here, which is the Linnaean Bone Hydra, which has a single main head, very large, and then a group of smaller heads it spawns each time you damage the main head enough. We're already done. Didn't have time to say anything at all about that, so that's great. And now we'll be on to the third biome of the game, Elysium, which is generally considered one of the most difficult and definitely the most inconsistent in speedruns. But because of our mod pack, that's definitely going to be significantly tamed. It's not going to be as bad as it normally would be, so we'll likely zip through Elysium as well. What we have here is just Chaos, which is basically a skip through a room, replacing it with just one menu here, which gives us a buff to our dash strike. That's good.
Yeah, and just as a general note in Hades speedrunning, while you see us trying to get a bunch of boons that kill things quickly, the fastest way to play Hades is actually just to skip killing things at all. So it is a little perplexing, I think, for some Hades runs, because some of the more exciting moments are actually you just, skipping all the combats in the game. But that being said, especially getting boss damage is still one of the things that is absolutely critical, because you can't skip bosses. So that's one of the reasons why we're focusing so hard on building this cast right now. And also that's one of the reasons why it's really nice to see that dash strike from Chaos, because again, because Flurry Jab is making our dash strike so much better, just getting an extra 60% damage even on the dash strikes can make a pretty significant impact on how much damage we're able to do to bosses.
Oh, and we have just picked up Hunting Blades there, that other buff that we mentioned for our cast. So now, as well as dropping 2 casts every time we use one, we'll also have each of those casts home in on the nearest enemy. So we're going to just be doing great things with our cast now, doing loads of boss damage. So that's more or less our late game solved now in a lot of ways. We'll be able to see that in practice, especially in the next 2 bosses that we're going to have, the Heroes of Elysium and also Hades himself. But we'll get to that in just a second. We are most of the way through Elysium now, it looks like.
Yeah. And this is also one of the points, now that we have our build more or less ironed out, because this is a real-time attack speedrun, we're going to actually end up trying to skip menus. Speaking of skips, we get Patty here in Chamber 33, which is the second to last chamber in Elysium, and that's really nice because especially the later Elysium chambers can just be super long. 3 waves of enemies spawning in slowly, so seeing the skip, especially late in a biome like that, is one of the things that makes Hades runs really fast.
And we are already done with the standard bit of Elysium there, the actual main bulk of it. We're now about to just go into the end shop here, which lets us briefly recuperate, do nothing in there, and then go into the third boss of the game, which, since we are running the Extreme Measures 4 incentive, will look a little bit different from how it normally does. So Extreme Measures is basically a buff to the bosses of the game, redesigns them, changes them in a bunch of interesting ways. In the case of the Heroes of Elysium, they get absolutely gorgeous armor, absolutely stunning stuff, and a chariot. So we're going to have some extra moves on those. Again, we're already shredding them before I even get to explain anything. That is Theseus dead. That is one part of the boss. And the second part of the boss here, the Minotaur, we are about to shred as well. We've just taken one Death Defiance, though, which is basically one of our lives. So that's slightly concerning for the final boss, but I'm sure we'll be fine. And that's the Heroes of Elysium boss immediately just down there. And now we're going into the final biome here.
Yep. And so Styx is another one of, especially when you're playing unmodded, it's one of those really, really swingy biomes. So in unmodded, essentially you have a 50% chance to find the Satyr Sack, which lets us proceed to the final boss fight in 2 tunnels. And then basically each tunnel after that, it's roughly 50-50. So you can see how it would be, it's really swingy in unmodded if you were to say, have to spend 5 tunnels to get the sack. That can be, 3 to 4 minutes of time loss compared to if you just gotten it in 2. So that's another one of the reasons why we have the speedrunning mod pack, or at least the original one, is just because the Styx RNG can be really punishing, and there's nothing you can do to correct it as a runner.
Not now.
Yes, and as well as the regular change that we've made for years now to basically guarantee that sack shows up as soon as possible, there are also some other changes that we make to Styx in the new version of the mod pack, the hyper-modded version that we're currently working on. Basically, we're also removing the most troublesome...
Yeah, the most troublesome enemies, so, looks like you're cutting out a bit, Sleep, but... the most troublesome enemies end up being these really tiny rats. They're super easy to kill, but they spawn in slowly. They can take 10-15 seconds to fill up a room.
Apologies there. I think my mic might have done some really interesting things. Not quite sure why. Thank you for cutting in there. Okay, so we're already done with Styx there. We're just going to go for a third Hermes, and that gives us Rush Delivery, which basically takes that movement speed buff that we had from earlier, that hyper sprint buff, and turns that into damage. So now that we have 100% move speed, we'll also have 100% damage on literally everything we do on our attack, on our cast. So we are about to absolutely destroy the final boss here, I reckon. We'll just go through the little animation here, and then we'll use our Meg summon.
There you go. And again, because this is EM4, there is an extra phase for Dad or for Hades, and we also see that the summons are, instead of just being normal enemies with a bunch of armor, they end up being some of the mini bosses that we could have seen earlier. So we've gotten the Doomstone from Tartarus that looks like one of the butterfly balls, which is the Elysium mid boss. And there are also a couple of other changes to the Dad fight as well. So we, not to spoil it too much, but at the end of Phase 2, or near the end of Phase 2, we should be seeing Hades using his own summon as well, which ends up being Cerberus, and then he also heals. That doesn't happen in the normal
Hang on, that's
EM1
assuming
fight.
he survives that. We
There
killed
we
him
go.
before he could even have a chance to use
Cerberus.
it. Great.
Exciting.
Okay, and now we'll be on to the bonus third phase, where everything goes dark and it just goes completely manic. He'll be rushing around here, and that's the second of our DDs. We do have one more, though, so I think we'll be fine.
Yeah, we should be fine here, especially with all the damage that we have.
Ooh. Okay, it might be a tiny bit
almost
close.
dead. There we go.
That's okay. And that is our first weapon down. That is Achilles down. And I believe we will now be moving on to the shield aspect Beowulf, which will be a really interesting one.
Yeah, 1409 even with EM4, so that's a really solid time that they put down there. Yeah, so next up is Beowulf, which is one of the weapons that is most beloved in the speedrunning community because it is one of the most broken weapons in the game. I think it was the last or second to last weapon that they added in before the game hit full 1.0, so it really didn't get as much testing as it perhaps needed, especially because it's re-implementing some of the logic for casts. So one of the things that's really interesting about Beowulf is that Mirage Shot, which should only give like a 30% damage bonus, ends up giving you just a straight 100% bonus to basically the cast damage. We can see that that what they're doing is they're loading the cast into the shield and then doing this what's called a bull rush. So when you do that, essentially the cast is going to pop at the end of the bull rush. So it's a really good way to get damage out quickly because instead of having our casts stuck in enemies, which most of the casts do, they just get stuck. It just drops to the ground. You can pick them up again. Sleep,
Right, and we've just picked up our first.
Yeah.
Yes, so exact same way as on Achilles, we'll also be very reliant on our hammer here, that being charge shot that we just got. So basically that takes the bull rush attack that we had, which is the charged attack, which is fairly slow, and turns it into this really snappy, quick cannon shot, basically. So now we can fire our cast straight across a room really nice and quickly. It's going to make our entire damage rotation really quick there. And we also just picked up Artemis, which we're going to put on our attack, which will buff that further. And that's also going to build into that Mirage Shot duo again.
And first palm as well. So we didn't really get a chance to touch on that very much, but especially when your damage is coming from a couple of, or like very few sources, these palms are going to be a very good way just to scale it up. So especially the first palm gives you essentially, it doubles your damage, not quite, but it changes the base damage and all of the damage that we get, so be it via rush delivery or mirage shot, is all going off of that base damage. So especially in like RTA speedruns, you get a really interesting thing of, do I take a palm to get a little bit extra damage, or do I skip the menu? Because obviously even picking up those palms can be a lot of time, especially if you're getting a bunch of them in one run.
Right, and we are almost at the end of Tartarus again.
We get Mirage?
We're just double rolling here. Desperately trying to get Mirage shot there. Unfortunately, did not pan out. So we'll just be going into the... Oh, might have another chance here.
Look. Ooh.
And still no, God. Okay, so for any build where you're relying on a duo, you do have to contend often with the fact that the odds of actually getting that duo boon, which, if you're not aware, duo boons are basically boons that between two gods, if you already have some of their boons, you can get basically as a combined boon from those two gods. So in that case, we're looking for Mirage Shot, which is the Artemis and Poseidon duo, and we unfortunately just didn't get it there, despite rolling about 4 times. So we're going to have to just luck out and hopefully get it in Asphodel here, because we just did not get the luck on that first attempt.
And I believe we are also on Legacy, which should give us a better chance of getting it. So it's pretty unlucky that we didn't get it. Also didn't quite have the money to buy the Light of Ixion, which will give us, if we could have gotten it, it would have forced a Chaos Gate to appear here. And remember that Chaos Gates are essentially another room that we don't need to fight anything in. But we do luck out and get one naturally the next chamber, so I guess it's okay that we didn't have the money.
How many more of these are there? I can take it.
Right, and we'll just be going into this Chaos Gate here, and since almost all of our damage is coming from our cast, we're really going to hope that we get some form of buff to our cast here from this Chaos. Unfortunately, not showing up there, and we're just saving our last roll for Mirage Shot, because almost nothing is as important as that. But basically, since Beowulf is entirely cast reliant, we are going to be looking out for any way to improve that damage here. We might look at this Well of Charon possibly, and we'll want to keep an eye out for those in general, because those can contain either more ammunition for our cast or a cast
And that
raid
is
that we
beautiful.
got there. Lovely.
Yep. So the item that we just got there is another way we can scale our cast. It'll give us 50% extra damage for a short time, but it still gives us a very solid damage buff going into the next boss. And we
Yes,
should...
and what we also got for our cast there was Rush Delivery again, the same buff that we got late in the game on Achilles. we now also have on Beowulf converting the movement speed from hyper sprint into 100% extra damage. There is Mirage Shot,
There
finally.
we go. And right into a Eurydice in 22. So, again, we managed to skip the end of the biome as well, which is doing great things for our time. And that's beautiful. We just also get to upgrade the rarity of Rush Delivery as well. So now instead of doing 100% of our move speed as extra damage, we do 125, which is when that's global damage and applying to both our cast and the times that we have to attack. That's really good.
And now we'll go into what is left of the Bone Hydra already.
Yep. I do want to, at this point, also note that while the incentive is for EM4, we do usually play with EM2, and that's because of this modified learning arena. So if you've played the game, you might be familiar with both the EM2 arena and the normal one, but the normal one is a lot bigger, so all of the heads are spread out, and they don't group up nicely like that. With EM2, we get this much smaller thing, and everyone groups up more nicely, and we don't need to run around between heads, and we can also, especially on weapons like Beowulf, just use our cast to do a whole bunch of damage to multiple heads at once.
Right, and that takes us into the latter half of the game again, into Elysium, which will then obviously be followed by the Heroes fight, and then Styx, and then Hades. And this might just be a good time to talk about why Beowulf is so good, because we will get a very good look at that now. So in general, as we've talked about before, since Mirage Shot is straight double damage on Beowulf rather than just an extra 30%, we are going to be dealing just huge single target damage, but also because we are using Poseidon's cast here, the area of effect of that damage is going to be massive. So, I mean, as you can see, we're using very few actual attacks per room, but each one of them is just spreading out over the entire thing, just covering loads of enemies. We barely missed the lineup on getting the second enemy there, but in general, we're going to be basically covering rooms, and that just gives us a really good ability to clear them out nice and quickly.
Yep. Although, because this is a 2P1C run, actually, that does make Bale a little bit harder to play. We were talking to Lapras and Elena before this, and they were talking about how, especially because Bale is entirely dependent on the casts, it takes a lot of coordination to figure out when are you picking up casts, when are you attacking something else, which ones are you going for. So it's really impressive to see them just zooming through the game, even though usually you'd have just one person doing this, so all the decision making can be a lot more streamlined.
Yes, in comparison to Achilles, I mean, interestingly, Achilles is generally considered a relatively difficult, relatively precise weapon, but like you say in our conversation that we had, apparently it's a lot easier to get Achilles going, because I mean, as you can see, it was pretty much just a flurry of special twice, attack, 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 special twice, attack, 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 attack. So it's generally sort of a more button-mashy quick weapon compared to Bayo, where you have to be a little more considerate about where your individual attacks are going, since you have the more of a kind of slow attack style. So it takes a lot more precision and coordination in a two-player, one-controller context compared to something like Achilles that we had earlier.
And we're already getting to the end of Elysium, so this is the last combat that we'd be seeing, and again, because of the specifics hyper-modded thing that we have, we're seeing essentially a snapshot of some of the best enemies we could get in these rooms. So instead of getting a bunch of unarmored enemies, we're getting armored enemies that the game considers harder, so it gives you less of them per room. And that's one of the things that is making it a lot more consistent to be playing on this particular hyper-modded setting, because instead of having a bunch of weak enemies, you can just deal with a couple of relatively strong ones.
Yes, in both unmodded and even in regular modded, what enemies you get can be a huge swing effect on how fast your run goes, especially in Elysium. You can get anything varying from these big, tanky Nemean chariots that we were seeing earlier, all the way down to tiny unarmored versions of those which spawn in absolute droves. So you can get a huge variance from a room that can go as little as like 5 seconds all the way into 30, which if you stack that up over the course of the 8 or so rooms in each biome, you can imagine how that adds up to a huge amount of time lost just depending on RNG. So obviously we're standardizing that in this case just to make everything a bit more consistent, a lot faster. Again, so fast that we're having a nightmare of a time even keeping up with what's going on here. So we are already done with the heroes fight again, and now we'll be going into Styx and Hades again. And that, of course, because of Beowulf having such a huge area of effect and so much immediate single target damage, we will absolutely shred these rooms here. So if we just give this first one about half a second, there we go. And again, each room here, we're just going to line up basically one volley of casts and just one-shot the entire thing ideally. We might have to contend with the geometry a little bit there, but that's fine. And
Yeah.
there we are.
Another thing you might have noted going into Styx is that we took the Sigil of the Dead, I think it's called, which is the Dad Call, just we more commonly refer to it as. We do that for a couple of reasons. So going into the Dad fight, which is about the only time we will be using it in this biome, it allows us to both manipulate the attacks he does, which admittedly is a little bit less important in hypermodded. But the other thing it lets us do is it just gives us another 100% damage buff while it's active. So really the name of the game here is we're just trying to stack up as much damage as we can so we just destroy the bosses.
Yes, and I am going to expect going into here that we're not likely to use our Meg Summons straight away. When we have as much damage as we do in this case, often on Beowulf we'll have massive stacked builds like this. We're quite likely to delay that Meg Summon and use it instead in phase 2 of the fight because, as you can see... Oh, unlucky. We just barely missed clearing that phase, yeah. And what we actually got there was Hades using his invisibility or darkness attack, we tend to call it. So named because he always says darkness as he does it, where he'll basically disappear for about 3 to 4 seconds each time, which obviously is very annoying as the form of time loss right near the end of the run. We lucked out and only got the one there.
Yep.
In both unmodded and regular modded, he can actually use that attack pretty much whenever he wants, so you can't go straight into the fight and just have him immediately disappear and waste 5 seconds of your life before you even have the chance to deal any damage to him. In this particular mod pack, we're actually changing that slightly so he can't use it instantly. He has to get at least one other attack out first, so we at least have the chance to deal with him, but unfortunately we just slipped very slightly at the start of the fight there, and we're also getting the Cerberus summon here, which is another brief time loss. That's another thing from the Extreme Measures 4 there, where he can actually use a summon against us rather than us just being the ones who can use that. And now we're into the third phase again.
And yeah, just watching the health bar goes down, like that's kind of one of the strengths of a lot of the builds that we end up getting on these runs, because obviously, like, it's just one volley is taking away like 2/3 of his health, so even EM4 Hades isn't too much of a challenge.
Okay, and that is done with the Beowulf run. Again, sub 14 actually, which for having Extreme Measures 4, adding a whole extra phase onto the end of the fight there, very, very impressive there. And now we'll be going from Beowulf into the third run of our 3 weapons run, so that of course being the final one, and that will be the Rail Aspect Hestia. So the Rail is an interesting weapon. Normally it attacks very quickly. You've got this sort of rapid fire main gun attack, and then the special, which is sort of a grenade launcher. Hestia will change that, because every time we reload, our attack will be massively buffed, all the way up to 150 base damage, which is about as much as any attack can deal in the game in one go. So, I mean, as you can see there, just completely unbuffed. Our attack is just nuking each of the enemies there. So similarly to Achilles, we're getting a lot of attack damage off the bat. We're going to shred the early game here, but similarly to Achilles, we're also going to have some difficulty scaling that into the late game. So we'll pick up some other tools to deal with the late game later.
Yep. And the other thing that we really like having in the early game, as early as possible, is the Poseidon Dash, because obviously our attack deals 150 base damage, but what we don't have is a good way to deal with, anything in an area of effect. So what the dash does is it gives us, first of all, a good amount of AoE damage for, those armored numbskulls that we saw, or witches. And it also provides a really significant amount of dash damage as well. I know that someone was using like a DPS mod earlier with different weapons, but the dash ended up doing something like half the damage in the Hades fight. So it doesn't seem like the numbers are very big, but over the course of like a 30-second fight, they really add up.
Yes, and it's actually quite interesting. I almost keep forgetting that we're actually having a 2-player 1 controller here because they are so in sync right now. But in general, since we have that reload buff on Hestia, we really want to reload before each attack. So the overall rhythm of the weapon can end up being fairly fiddly and complex for one player to get together. But even in this case, with having 2 people who have to coordinate, we're getting some really tight gameplay here. Just getting some really snappy reload before each attack, a really clean rhythm. So we are absolutely shredding Tartarus again right near the end now. And there is a chaos there as well, so now we'll just skip the final room here. So we just have the 1 left.
Yep. Another thing Chaos Gates can do, we haven't really seen a great example of it yet, but Chaos Gates can provide a bunch of damage that will be super helpful for the run. So what we're looking for on Hestia here is either special, attack, or dash strike. And yeah, we get a 50% special. So that's not a super huge number, but it does add up over time. Especially as we start stacking that with rush delivery.
Yes, we just picked up our first Hermes again there, that of course being Hyper Sprint since it's guaranteed, so we'll also get the Rush Delivery buff later on Hestia, and we're just really quickly and snappily cleaning up the first Fury here, very nice.
This is super clean, especially given that it's a 2p1c, but even without that, it's a super clean fight. Again, kind of coming back to, it's a very rhythmic weapon, and it's, I believe, I know Elena does, I think Lapras probably runs Hestia in her normal through-ups lineup, but Elena actually runs a different rail that's kind of very commonly used in the speedrunning scene, called Eris, because it gets a additive damage buff, but this is another one of those decisions that they made due to the 2p1c run. It's just a little bit easier to do, just based on the rhythm alone, and you're doing certain things at certain times just to keep the attack cycle up. So it's really interesting seeing just how they're adapting to having to split the controller like this.
Yes, and speaking of adapting, when we were talking about the run before we started last night, it did also come up that we're actually remapping a lot of our controls in order to adapt to that 2-player 1 controller run that we're currently having to do. I mean, I can say from my personal experience of having to play this category at one point, it does end up quite interesting sort of allocating duties to one player versus another. So I believe what we had is Lapras is doing all of the actual attacking and specialing, and then Lena is handling all of the movement. You're free to correct me if I'm wrong there. But
yeah,
basically,
also Lap has the reload button, which is
yes,
definitely a Hestia-specific thing, but is very important on this weapon.
Yes, so in general, we're having one player basically coordinate the positioning and another player coordinate a lot of the actual attacking and especially reloading, all of that rhythm there. We're relatively near the end of the biome now. We have just had another lucky skip here, this being the fountain, which basically just gives us a moment to pick up a reward here and then also heal up. We'll see whether we have to play... Yeah, we do have to play the very last chamber of the biome now.
Another thing that modded gives us, you might have noticed that how we had that glowing thing around the fountain. That's another thing that we have in the normal mod pack, but obviously it's also staying in hyper as well. But that, again, just kind of reduces some of the RNG because it lets you see when you're getting those skips, which makes it easier to actually get the skips at the end of the day as well.
Yeah, and just to elaborate a tiny bit on the matter of the different modded rule sets. So we've been using regular modded Hades for about, I want to say, a year and a half now, possibly more.
That sounds
And
about
that
right,
basically, yeah, and that modded rule set that we use, it was originally intended for racing and marathons like this one, which that one basically just adds a couple standardization features. It adds, like we said, the sack always being in tunnel 2 the earliest possible. It adds a single guaranteed hammer. As we say, a lot of weapons are very reliant on getting the correct daedalus hammer. So flurry jab, charge shot. We didn't get the chance to talk about it, but in this case, rocket bomb, which basically turns our grenade launcher into an RPG. And that adds a lot of standardization to runs, makes them a lot more consistent, especially on certain weapons that are more reliant on those features. But it doesn't necessarily fix everything. So, I mean, for instance, like we were talking about earlier, in Elysium, it didn't change anything about the enemies we get, so that could add a lot of variance over time. It didn't actually affect the second hammer, which we pick up, which on a lot of weapons isn't super significant, but on Hestia here, we are about to pick up our second hammer, and like we said earlier, Hestia on its own can often struggle in the late game, and our second hammer here will be doing an awful lot to help us with that. So our second hammer here is Cluster Bomb. What it basically does to your special is it multiplies it by 5, but adds a small debuff to its damage, and that normally makes it a decent hammer, a little bit slow, a little bit unreliable, hard to control. But in this case, since our first hammer was Rocket Bomb, which slightly changes the base damage of your special in the first place, that actually overrides the damage debuff that we get from Cluster Bomb. And also, all of our specials there will come out all at once, rather than one at a time. So, we are just shredding the late game here, as you can see. A lot like we were on Beowulf, because that just gives us a huge burst of damage we can fire out all in one go. Again, immediately shredding that butterfly ball there.
I'll keep my sword for now, thanks.
Okay. And yeah, that's probably one of the bigger features that we see in Hypermodded is that guaranteed second hammer, because it removes essentially a 1 in 3 chance from the end of the run for some weapons. Especially as you're pushing for lower times, that extra massive burst damage just becomes super important to doing bosses quickly. So it is a bit of a paradigm shift from regular modded to hyper modded, where we're kind of hyper modded, we're just trying to get like the fastest runs and have fun with it. Regular modded was really just trying to cut down on some of the most annoying resets. Yeah, so we're just kind of zooming through the end of Elysium here, but
unfortunately we're a little bit dry on skips here, so we're having to actually play a lot of these rooms. We're very fortunate that we are in hyper-modded here, so we're not having to deal with any particularly small or tedious enemies. We're getting a lot of the armored enemies here, as well as the big chariots, which are very tanky, so they count for a lot rather than being tiny enemies that spawn in huge amounts. We'll just hopefully get to at least skip Chamber 34 here, so we don't have to play the whole thing. Oh, God.
We missed mid-shop too, I think, so...
yeah, not usually, Elysium in the slightest.
Usually we'd at least get to skip one room because the game forces mid-shop, so you can usually see it and at least get one skip. But we got really unlucky here and didn't get any of those either. But still a very, very solid time. I think we're entering Heroes under 10 minutes. So given that we played basically all of Elysium, that's really, really impressive.
Yes, and we'll also get to see in practice how much of a difference the Cluster Rockets combo makes in bosses here. again, really nice and quickly shredding the Minotaur and then Theseus here, getting them both into their second phase. And that's the Minotaur down already. Oh, he's doing the thing.
He's doing the thing. He's now no
Yeah,
longer
there is an
doing the thing.
occasional bug where when you phase the Minotaur first, Theseus can get a little bit confused and will just stay in his in-between phases animation for a solid like 10 seconds, which was very irritating there.
We think it has something to do. We think it has something to do with the attacks that he selects or something, but we aren't entirely sure why it happens. It's unfortunate, but it's not a huge time loss at the end of the day. And we still have a very, very solid Styx entrance.
Yes, and I mean, it's quite interesting comparing Hades in general to other speed games. We don't actually have a lot of bugs in general, or at least not a lot of known bugs. We don't use a lot of skips like you would normally see in a speed game. We don't use any glitches or anything to affect our movement or damage or anything. All we really have is regular Hades play, just trying to get it as clean as possible. And
with the occasional, silly oversight, like the Mirage shot thing that we have, there are a couple of other things that do pop up, especially in like routed Hades. You get like movement speed is actually multiplicative, so you can see Zagreus running super quickly, but at the end of the day, there still aren't. It's a pretty well-made game, and there aren't a bunch of game-breaking bugs. So it just comes down to clean execution more than anything else.
And again, we will be relying on that clean execution as we go into Hades for the last time. We're just picking up another movement speed buff from Hermes there, which is going to multiply with our first one, give us a bunch of damage to deal with him with, and hopefully we'll be able to avoid any darknesses or any deaths or mess or anything, and just be able to close out this run very nice and cleanly with another Extreme Measures 4 kill. We'll be using our cluster rockets damage, trying to get nice and close up, shoot all those rockets straight into him rather than letting any of them go to waste. Hopefully we'll be able to clean this nice and quickly.
Yep, and then time will be coming up at the end of this fight. We'll see exactly how long that is, but
very nice and clean there, hugging our dad, shooting loads of rockets straight into him. And
we saw a really good use of the dad call there to try and prevent that darkness, but he just he did an attack and then went and did a darkness right after that. So it was a little unlucky there, but still a very clean first phase.
And let's see whether we get the Cerberus summon again here, or whether we'll be able to clean it quickly enough.
And
that is another skip of the Cerberus
really,
summon.
Really clean second phase too.
Yes, and we are now nearing the end. We are getting right up close to the end of phase 3. So once we have dealt a little bit more damage, it will be time in a few seconds. We're just taking one Death Defiance there, unfortunately. Wasting a little bit of time, and that is time. Great. Okay, so that is
wonderful
all
run.
3 of our weapons all
And
cleared up.
that's a
Very nice.
1339, even with the M4. Really, really good run.
That is very nice. That is our 3 weapons run done. Very impressive stuff, really, in general. Just impressively clean execution, especially for having to coordinate 2 players running the game together. I mean, like I said earlier, it's almost easy to forget that we had 2 people trying to coordinate with each other, because that just looked so clean throughout. Very impressive stuff from Lapras and Lena there.
Yeah, good job, guys.
Thank you.
Great work. Congratulations, GG.
That was fun.
Yes, and I believe next up we have just a bit of a sleep slot, don't we?
No, we do have
one more game.
one more game coming up, which I will fill in when we go back to the break screen.
Okay, so I guess that just gives us a tiny bit of time to plug. Lapras,
42.
Lena, do you want to plug anything?
Twitch.tv/arcalena is my Twitch. Also, Hades speedrun community, great. Thanks for all that y'all came out to support Cora. Saw some of y'all in chat.
Yeah.
Yeah, Hades speedrun community, always amazing, always showing out. Twitch.tv/trash_Lapras. Just want to say thanks for having us here as a fellow trans person that left Texas recently. I'm glad to support however I can. So, yeah, trans rights and all that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, very happy to help indeed. Very happy to be hosted here. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
It's
thanks for
been
having us.
really great to show off everything about this game, speedrunning it, stuff like that.
Big
My
shout
Twitch
out.
personally, yeah. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go for it. I was just gonna. I thought you were stopping. I was just gonna again, just shout outs again to the Hades speedrunning community. Y'all are very cool.
Yeah, I can say personally for the past, I want to say 2 years, it might be now, Jesus, that I've been in the community. It's been a really accepting, really positive place. I'm very happy to have been around all of the runners here, all of the runners in the Hades speedrun community. Been a lovely experience. My Twitch is twitch.tv/sleep_soul. Nevik, is yours just Nevik?
Just twitch.tv/Nevik.
That being N-N-E-V-I... Wait, no.
VIC,
N-N-E-V-I-C. I can't say letters, apparently. I'm delirious. And yeah, I believe that should be just about everything from us. Thank you so much for having us. That was absolutely lovely, absolutely amazing run to commentate there. And I think that's everything.
That was incredible. The absolute, just the skill with the coordination. 2 players, 1 controller. One controller. I could barely keep up with what was going on, but that's just a testament to how awesome that was. 3 very clean runs there. Thank you very much, Trash Lapras and Arcalena, for that fantastic run of Hades. 2 players, 1 controller, hyper modded, 3 weapons. Let's get a virtual round of applause back into chat there. You are still watching Corathon. Sandshark is my name. I will be your host for the final game we have coming up next, which will be Sly Cooper and the Thievius Raccoons, category All Keys by Alice at Wonderland Games. So we don't have much longer to go today, but we will be back tomorrow after this last game, so let's end it with a bang, shall we? However, while we're waiting, we have a few donations that came in during that last run in support of Cora for Corathon. We had Sean Robertson come through with a $5 donation who says, trans rights are human rights. And I agree 100%, and I'm sure everyone does. Trans rights are human rights. We also have a $25 donation here from Satish Ram with no comment. Thank you so much. Very Apologies for those tech issues. I will repeat that donation in case it was cut off. We had a $25 from Satish Ram with no comments, but thank you very much for your generous donation. All donations, big or small, help. And again, we appreciate everyone for viewing, watching, sharing, and chatting. So thank you very much. We also have a $100 donation here from Oriol Son, who says, trans rights, woo! I do like the enthusiasm, and yes, trans rights indeed. That is why we are all here. Thank you very much for all of your generous donations. We still have time this evening. Like I said, a next run estimate is approximately 1 hour long, so you still have a bit more time today to get your donations in. Just before we go to the next run, though, we are going to take a quick break. The stream will still be running, but Corathon will be back very shortly. Welcome back, everyone, to Corathon. As I said before, we have one more run tonight, and that will be coming up very soon. That run will be Sly Cooper and the Thieves Raccoons, all keys by Alice at Wonderland Games. Then we have one more run to finish off day one of Corathon.